two psychiatrists rapping about our lives and work.
This podcast is not intended to be medical advice. Any stories we use have been altered to protect identities and sensitive information.
This is intended for entertainment purposes only.
You know it!
Ow!
Welcome to The Good Shrinks. Boy, howdy, we got a show for you today.
There's a show that's really kind of entered the culture zeitgeist that I think we really want to talk about.
Yeah, this is the show Quiet on Set.
Yes, and it is not very quiet.
No, there's a lot to be revealed.
Yes, very heavy topics. It talks about child stars, child employment, sexual abuse,
racial and
female discrimination,
tensions. So yeah, we thought we would review this one, take a look at it.
Yeah, and so since we will be talking about heavy topics such as sexual abuse, just a disclaimer, if it is something that is difficult for you, it will be a topic discussed today. And, we're just two individuals reviewing the show. Any opinions we have are just our opinions. There's no formal diagnoses. We don't know any of these individuals. We just found the show fascinating and how it's kind of taken over our culture in the moment.
Just wanted to talk about our feelings about it. Completely our opinions. We are not representing anybody, and this is just what we're thinking in the moment.
T, from just the show in general, I know a lot of the shows discussed were kind of from the mid-90s to the mid-2000s. From your perspective at that time of your life, were you very involved with those shows?
Not at all.
Okay.
I was just finishing up my residency, and so didn't have a whole lot of time to watch. And plus, it was just not quite, I sort of was more of an 80s. I grew up sort of in the 80s, so this was just right after my, my time that I would have been, sitting around watching TV.
Yeah. For me, I was probably a mid to late teen when some of the shows they really focused on Quiet on the Set were going on. So, I knew them peripherally, but I wasn't quite, in the age demographic, The Amanda Show, Drake and Josh, iCarly.
Right. When they mentioned Ren and Stimpy, that, triggered something. I definitely was a Ren and Stimpy fan.
Definitely loved Ren and Stimpy,
Yeah.
Salute Your Shorts,
Right.
all that I definitely watch. And actually, what I like about you, me and my sister used to watch that all the time, and it was interesting how Amanda Bynes was kind of portrayed as so much older than her age. I didn't realize
In the show?
Yeah. I didn't realize it was almost like they were 20-somethings, and she was only 16 at the time, which, we'll kind of get into.
Yeah, these kids were really talented. They were out there. It was really cool sort of seeing the beginnings of the show. Like Kenan Thompson, I didn't even realize he was a child star on Nickelodeon and how long he's been in the business now, still on Saturday Night Live. So, yeah, it was cool to see these kids just in their childhood, literally, just starting to show all that talent and promise.
Yeah. Welcome to Good Burger, home of the Good Burger. Can I take your order? I used to love Kenan and Kel. But, getting into the deep dive of the show, something that really just sparked for me initially was how they portrayed Dan Schneider and kind of the focus of his maybe evolution. They said, early on, his parents really didn't feel like he would amount to much, which was interesting. They would mention that. They said that
it's like they were trying to set up a diagnosis
in a sense
in the show, but yeah, it's important information.
Yeah, and that he was typecast when he was an actor initially as kind of more the overweight or the fat person, and I think to some degree that's just interesting. They had him as almost I don't want to say an underdog, but undervalued,
maybe, right? Insecure, maybe, or feeling like he wouldn't amount to much, and so he sort of had this drive maybe to prove himself to his parents or to society in general that he was more than just that stereotype.
Yeah, to prove people
wrong. Which
wrong.
Is sad that if he had that stereotype or feeling about it, that he would, project that onto all of these other situations. He felt a certain way about maybe his weight or how he was, his appearance. And then he sort of fostered this culture where other people could also feel discriminated against or stereotyped.
Yeah, which is a big part of the show, right? They talk about how he...
Do you think that was unconscious?
Yeah, I do, actually. I think, they were mentioning he had, a lot of emotional ability. He would threaten to fire people quickly on set. These are all kind of secondhand accounts, but in a sense it created that environment. And, kind of going back to just in general, it's I kept getting this sense of like feelings of inadequacy, right? And we just know like individuals that have some narcissistic tendencies, right? They present themselves as grandiose, verbose, people are expendable, but at their core, there's always that deep inadequacy. So it's interesting. They really kind of set that up in the show. That's just kind of interesting that's how they portrayed it.
Also, just sort of like that antisocial kind of feel. Like he didn't really have empathy for other people. It was really like, what? Here are these people working. The woman keeled over. Like the editor, she keeled over from, working from 8 a.m. until midnight, trying to edit the show, and always being told, do it faster. Never directed anything at her, like directly spoke to her, but just tell her to do this faster, to do this. Till she keeled over and had to go to the hospital. And his only thought was, how are we going to get this done now?
I love when she was like, I'll be right back. I'm like, I don't know why that would make me smirk so much, because it was sort of like she still was trying to people please.
Yeah.
And
the massages. Here are these people trying to do their jobs, and he's like bullying them to come and do a massage.
Yeah.
Just no empathy for other people. So that always is like a sign of being a psychopath or antisocial. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point, and that was kind of something that was the documentary, they really kind of mentioned, like people kind of being on edge and having to laugh, and even if they felt like it was inappropriate, it's like their jobs felt like they were on the line. And so watching it, it's kind of like, really anyone can identify to some degree, right? Everyone has a manager, everyone has a boss. In some sense, people do want to sort of please or make sure, like, let's say your boss has a joke, you want to make sure you laugh, right?
Right.
But it seems like it was kind of taken to excess on the show.
Just understood that this is the way, And again, this is somebody who has your career, and we're talking about kids. So not only do you have the power differential of you're an adult over these kids telling them what to do, but now you're also paying them. So you're like doubly, powerful to these kids. And the way that they kind of, they say that the parents were always available, they could see, but it also sounded like there was kind of a tendency to want to push them out, to push the parents out, to hush them up, especially if you're causing any kind of problems or questioning things. We're going to get you out of here.
Yeah. The one kind of mother, Tracy, who was like very kind of verbose, like you could tell she almost felt validated now, in a sense, because she kind of noticed things weren't going well, and it almost seems like they kind of were like you said, outcasting her to some degree, and even her son, right?
The damage that it caused.
They ended their relationship for a period of time,
just until the documentary,
which is interesting. That's a lot.
You can't get those years back.
Yeah. I mean, T, what do you think about sort of this reevaluation of that time period? I mean, the Me Too movement took place. It seems like they really reevaluated some of the narratives of the shows and kind of what was going on the show. And it gave people grounds and sort of a voice to address their opinions and their discontent with what was going on.
Just sort of uncork the bottle, finally sort of turn the page to where now, you can say, you can do, it's such a liberating moment.
Yeah. And kind of showing some of the clips that were portrayed, the pickle through the hole in the bathroom, the very blatant money shots that were shown.
These scenes. Like, I wasn't really watching Nickelodeon at the time, but I can't help but think inappropriate. Like, I don't know. People really thought this was funny back then?
That's a good question. I mean, clearly it was successful. And maybe
not just inappropriate, but was it even funny? I just don't even know if these shows were super funny.
I think humor, in some sense, has to be racy, I mean, right? That's kind of what makes humor entertaining, is you're kind of reaching a line. But the thing is, you don't want to necessarily cross that line. And once you start introducing, like, basically glory holes into a kid's show, I mean, that's crossing the line. Again, maybe at that time, like, it was just such a different lens. I mean, the late 90s, early 2000s were different than now. So maybe those things were, people didn't want to admit they knew what the symbolism was. because it would show some negative connotation towards them as a person, just because the times were different and LGBT rights weren't as expressed and racism wasn't talked about as much. It was more underlying. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to think. Bugs Bunny is funny, and that. I mean, he was cross-dressing. He was doing all kinds of stuff back then,
Well,
it was, but it was funny.
Yeah.
And so adults got it, but kids got it too. I can't compare Nickelodeon to that. Like, it wasn't really funny. I don't know. I don't know. But you have to remember this: your audience is the children.
Yeah.
So you have to do things that are appropriate. For these kids, I don't know.
And Nickelodeon, it said in the documentary, they kind of developed that reputation where it was like they weren't educational, they were entertainment.
Wow.
And they kind of went that route. And I mean, it sounds like there was a lot of success from a lot of these shows.
It does.
While watching the documentary, I was trying to really kind of focus that, like, what would the show have seemed like at the time? And maybe just not enough adults were really paying attention. I'm not sure.
I don't know. And it was just right at the time where, the internet was starting up. And so, like in 99, I had my first email account, like the first ever. So, yeah, things were just starting to turn in the 90s.
Which brings up another good point. Nowadays, you can rewatch something 5,000 times. Back then, it was a TV show. It came on once a day. You may see a rerun of it. Like, it would be much easier to sort of brush under the rug because you're not seeing it as consistently.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
That's a good point. That is a very good point.
I mean, so those sort of things.
And there was no social media really to speak of back then.
Yeah, there was no sort of united, I guess, front in a way from just individuals, from society. So
to get together and say, hey, what do you think about this?
Yeah.
In the moment, like you said, you had to wait for the rerun, or you had to wait for you might have a VCR so you could record it.
Yeah.
But
well, whether it was like appropriate or not, Nickelodeon was cashing them checks. Okay,
right.
so
again, that power differential between they're paying you, so you sort of feel an obligation to do your job. Part of your job is to make sure your boss likes you.
Yeah, and they kind of set Dan Schneider up to be almost like a dark father figure for these kids. Like, he's just sort of like this overlord. They wrote him into sketches where he was like the god, right? I mean,
The Charlie's Angels.
Yeah,
sketch.
right. He was like Charlie and Charlie's Angels, which is also very weird because these are literal kids, and so it's just, I think a lot of the parents probably felt like they had to silence their opinions because they didn't want, it's sort of one of those things like you get a million no's before you get a yes in the industry.
Right.
You've made it onto the show. It's like, put up with things so we can kind of keep going and advance your career.
And don't you feel like, these people know that? Like, Dan Schneider knows that.
Yeah.
As being somebody who also went through those things. He knew, I feel like, him and the executives, they know what they're doing. They're giving these people a chance. They're giving them a shot, and they expect things from them.
Which, to some degree,
that's
is a
business.
requirement. Yeah, that's business.
That's business.
That's the other thing I sort of thought of during the documentary is, like, the sensitivity we have now towards things is so much higher. I mean, I do remember, like, the early 2000s, and in general, work was work. Like, you kind of like put up or shut up, right? And so that mentality was very different than now, where it's like, well, everyone's like, well, wait a minute. I don't know.
Diversity training.
Yeah, like everything. And just in general, what people were willing to tolerate. And with Dan Schneider, he seemed to have favorites, right? So Katrina Johnson was his initial favorite, and she was kind of humorous in how she mentioned, like, he discarded her at some point, right? And then, she actually was the reason that he found Amanda Bynes at the comedy show. And she was obviously a true talent of force, right?
Yeah, she was.
Just
super talented.
Very
crazy. At 9 and 10,
yeah,
she could have had her own variety show.
Yeah,
and she did.
Yeah,
basically.
Do you think there was some degree, like with Dan Schneider, we're kind of mentioning like having antisocial narcissistic tendencies potentially? Do you think there was some like devaluation of Katrina Johnson for Amanda, or do you think it was just sort of a coincidence that, as Amanda's star rose, then she kind of was, not as emphasized on the show?
I'm trying to remember that scene because I feel like there was a situation. Didn't Katrina say something or didn't laugh at something, or there was something that kind of perturbed Dan, I feel like.
I'm trying to remember. The main thing I remember is she was maturing, right?
Right. So she was being told she can't get too fat because they already had a fat kid. Then she hit puberty, and then she started to have more of a womanly body, and so that was kind of making it hard because they wanted like a little girly kind of figure. So some things were happening to her that were beyond her control. This is just her developing.
Yeah.
But yeah, then she got booted out.
Right. But do you think at some degree could that be some of his character structure of like idealizing and devaluing a person, or do you think it was? I know it's hard to say, but
it is hard from what they've given us
Yeah.
because it sounded like it was she no longer fit what they needed in their programming. But was that all Dan? I don't know.
Well, yeah,
You know what
and
I mean?
I guess the
To
reason
be fair.
Yeah, I think that's being very fair because I think the other thing in the documentary they kind of mentioned him always having like his favorite, right?
Right.
And so that's kind of why I maybe more so bring that up is like he seemed to kind of gravitate, and whether that was because they were a true talent in the moment or whatnot, it's kind of hard to say, you know.
Yeah, they both had their time in the sun. You know, talking about the power differential, those staff writers, Chrissy Staton and Jenny Kilgren, remember how they were treated in their story?
Yeah, I mean, it just showed the dynamics back then. They were willing to both work for one salary. Like, who would tolerate that now? And it was all to get their foot in the door. I was looking at some research, and it said there was only about 13% of entertainment writers in Hollywood at the time were female. So, I mean, really, it's like 1 out of 10. So they were doing everything they could.
Right.
During the documentary, like Dan Schneider would say things like, "Oh, females aren't funny," right? He would use like derogatory, like slut, bitch, like those sort of things, and
Just say it.
yeah, right, or just say it, and even the sodomy portion where he forced her to do that, which, I mean, it was very sexist, right?
Just inappropriate.
Yeah.
Just on so many levels. And to be made to feel like that, because if you didn't, you're out the door.
Yeah.
And then to do all of that hard work to endure it and then come back in the next season, again, having to work 11 weeks for free. And then they hired somebody with a full salary that was a man,
Yes.
younger than her, had no experience. She had already done the show for a year.
Yeah.
You couldn't promote her. You couldn't make her feel, valued.
Well, that was kind of a general sense is like whenever, even the engineer you brought up earlier, they were always replaced with an unexperienced male, like right out
Getting
of college.
full salary.
Yeah. Even things like, when he jokingly bet $300 for one of them to eat like a tub of ice cream and then never paid her, and then he became really defensive about it. I mean, it's just all very power dynamics, you know, like very much the underlying tension there. And it seems like the tension was pretty persistent. And I think that's why, basically they both left after the first season, right? I mean, Chrissy Staton, right? She was fired for having one night out with her friends.
Again, no time, no empathy for anybody else having a life.
Yeah. Jenny Kilgren, she really only lasted 1 day alone. She's like, I cannot survive in this environment alone, which was interesting, right?
Yeah. She said 4 days. She lasted 4 days and she was out.
So, and
Speaking of slave drivers, the racial component too. Like the way that the black children, the racial tension there too. Giovanni Samuels and Brian Hearn talked about as being stars on their show and sort of feeling like, she would joke about being the token on the show.
Well, it was interesting just seeing the difference between kind of the children, like with the African American children on the show, like they kind of made statements like, I felt like I needed to do the job to support my family, which, I mean, it's interesting because like you didn't really hear the white kids saying that, right? Which it just shows like coming from a place of, I don't know, not material, but less socioeconomic status maybe. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And then again, it kind of put more pressure on them to perform and tolerate things to some degree.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't think found out much about the family lives of the other children. I don't know. They could have been from poverty too. You know, the parents were driving them all around, but yeah, some of them had like dance lessons or they could be driven around to go around. But, you know,
I mean, you bring up a good point is like also in the documentary, do they sort of glorify maybe the disparity? I mean, I hate to say it like that.
I don't know. I mean, there were only 2 children on that show.
Yeah.
In that particular show, so you can't really generalize to. But that's the whole thing, is that they were meant to like represent all black boys and all black girls and all their points of view. Like, you can't do that.
Well, and also the way they chose to represent it, like he was like basically
stereotypes.
selling the stereotypes, like selling candy, which was supposed to be like drugs, right? Or, I mean, it was just bizarre. And then really the biggest thing that bothered me on the show was the nose uniform.
Yes, the penis and the scrotum.
Yeah, it looked exactly
shooting things out into that girl's face.
Because I look any more like penises on his shoulder. Honestly, I was like, it was wild, right?
And you say, I'm uncomfortable, I don't want to do this, and you're out.
Yeah.
So you decide what you're going to endure. And I feel like nobody endured more than poor Drake Bell.
I know.
I mean, that just took a turn.
Yeah.
It took a horrible turn. I mean, first there were the stories about the pedophile, the one that sent the inappropriate emails. I mean, beyond inappropriate, the sexually graphic emails to that child. And the mom, you know, struggling with deciding whether or not to call the police. Like, what do you think you would have done in that situation? I mean, I heard the mom's perspective that she didn't want to be thought of as a bad parent because she let them correspond with each other.
Yeah, so I believe you're referring to the Jason Handy portion of the show, right? Mm-hmm. When he was sending the inappropriate emails of himself. You know, I did think that was an interesting choice. She decided more so to minimize the event and not get her overly involved with the court system and everything, which that's tough. I mean, I'll be honest, from a personal perspective, I kind of agree. It's like they were already out of the Hollywood system, so it's like, why are we going to add fuel to this fire? Like, it was an inappropriate picture. Let's treat it that way. Make it a lesson that, you know, people can do inappropriate things and you have to protect yourself. Because, like, what would she really get from forcing her into like an extended legal battle over this person, right? Except for that person then being accountable,
convicted, right, and not being able to do it to anybody else.
So it's a tough one. Yeah, it's kind of like, do you put your child under more stress for maybe a better outcome for just society? Does that make sense? Right. I don't know. Is that weird to say? It's sort of like,
I guess I would have had more of a conversation with the child, even though, you know, you are the adult. You have to make the adult decision. Yeah. But I would want to know what would this mean to her? If we went to court, you know, lay out all the pros and cons. This is what might happen, and I'm going to be with you every step of the way, whether you want to do this or not. But what would you want? What would be your ideal? And depending on, you know, if she was like, I don't want to deal with it, I don't want to have anything to do with it, I'm scared, you know, whatever, we would talk through it. I would share what I would want to do with the child and just kind of go through why I would want to do this, and then, you know, make a decision.
That's true. I mean, because I think she was like an early teenager.
She was 11 or 11. 12, like,
so she would be old enough to create an opinion and kind of understand why you would be going through that process to some degree, right? So that's true. I mean, kind of seeing where her...
And she may have done that. Mom may have done that. And then just decided that we're not going to do this.
Yeah.
They didn't really go into details, but just thinking about it, like, what would I do in that situation?
I think my takeaway from it was they were kind of already had distanced themselves from Hollywood, and it sounded like the mom had previous experience, right, with her mom being in Hollywood, and so, if I remember right.
Yeah, she did.
So it's kind of, I think it was like she just wanted to distance herself as much as she could, and that is an interesting decision. But yeah, it's a tough one. And then kind of going into, you know, Brian Peck, right, where they spent majority of the documentary speaking about individuals that groom and kind of the whole process of sexual abuse. I mean, it really is shown through kind of his narrative. Yeah, with Drake Bell. I guess like for me, like sort of Drake and his dynamics with his parents. I mean, obviously they divorced when he was very young. Dad was very involved, and Dad said like there's something going on here.
Right, he
you
could
know?
see signs that something was off.
Yeah.
This guy was just too close to his son. Why are you touching my son? Why are you rubbing his arm? No, this is not right.
Yeah, I mean, even going to concerts miles and miles away. I mean, but that had to be like, wow, why is he doing that? There has to be some
going on?
Yeah.
Right.
But I can also see too, in a sense, it's
Nickelodeon. Like they're gonna do things. I mean, you're thinking this is a huge
and he's a big part of
celebrity, outfit.
he's a big part of the production, right? So in a sense, you're like, well, this is going to sort of help advance his career. You may just see it as him taking a special interest, but kind of the start of he could sense like you have to sometimes follow your gut and be like, this is a little bit too close.
Mm-hmm. And just how insidious it was. It was like a campaign. He systematically got Dad out of the picture, got Mom on his side to feel comfortable with him, and then just went in for the kill. It just was... How many times has he done that?
Yeah, that's a good question.
I mean, that's what I was left thinking. Like, he knew what he was doing.
I mean, they kind of insinuated like encounters with Leonardo DiCaprio and other celebrities. I mean, who knows, right?
Who knows?
But Drake Bell said himself, like the wool was pulled over his eyes by Brian Peck. Like it was insidious, and they showed that in the show. Like Brian Peck started making comments like, your dad's trying to take advantage of your money.
That's what I mean.
He's not helping your career, right? And so they
don't like him on the set.
Yeah.
He really needs to go.
Yeah.
Just day in and day out. It's a campaign. This is what you do, propaganda. You put it out there, you say it over and over again until the person breaks.
Yeah, well, and it also worked to some degree because the dad did become less involved. He started sleeping over at Brian Peck's house because it was more convenient for whatever they were doing the next day, or going to some, amusement park or whatever the excuse was. And with child abuse, right, like the initial stage is like the tension stage, they call that. And that's kind of where a lot of the quote unquote grooming happens. And then you can just see it in the documentary. That's what was going on. Mm-hmm. And then even, I know a lot of people have mentioned like Drake's mom has gotten a little bit of fallout from the show.
Well, what I was going to say is that, he did such a great job with that campaign. He was basically telling him those things about Dad. We don't want him on the set. You got to go. And then basically convinced Drake to drop his father. Mm-hmm. And that heartbreaking conversation that Drake had with his dad, and where Dad was like, I really don't want to leave, but if this is what you really want, then I want to do what you really want. And it pains me, it breaks my heart, but I will do what you want. So it was only after he got Dad out of the picture and Drake told him, yes, I want you to go. And then he went into Mom's custody. But Dad told Mom, do not let him out of your sight. I don't trust this guy. Don't leave him alone with this guy. So I think that's probably why Mom got some heat, because it was built up that the dad was warning her and she didn't follow the warning.
Yeah.
Again, he was just so good at making the parents feel comfortable with him in control. That I'm going to watch your son. I got him. He's safe with me. I'm going to take him to this audition, bring him back in the morning. So, Mom, I'm thinking, based on the way that the show built it up, I'm like, remember what Dad said? Remember what Dad said? Mm-hmm. Don't leave him alone with that man.
Yeah.
But, she was bamboozled. She was, made
she
to
probably
believe it
felt
was
like
okay.
he was taken care of to some degree, right? And so there was like some maybe trust at the time, which again could be part of the grooming phase. And then, think about the red flags, the John Wayne Gacy whole portion.
Right!
The man was literally writing him letters. This is a literal killer of children.
He is a pen pal with John Wayne Gacy. Got an autographed painting in his room.
Yes. Like idolizing
ding, ding,
this.
Ding, ding. Now, again, these kids are what, 13, 14? But they may not know.
They didn't
know maybe who that was.
Most people may not. But, he's pretty famous, but still.
And it was that easily found? Like, it obviously wasn't hidden. He didn't have it in some room.
Yeah, he was
with
like
a panic room or something. He had it out so people could see it at a party. Yeah. That was just okay. Then he pulls out letters.
And he almost sounds like he was...
the creep factor.
Yeah, he was like gloating about it. It seemed like to some degree.
Proud,
he was proud of it. So that was interesting.
He was
So
already off.
Yeah, I
Then.
mean, sometimes you
So
ignore.
who knows? He could have, John Wayne Gacy killed these boys.
Yeah.
Maybe that was his, I don't know, was he getting tips from John Wayne Gacy what to do? Who knows?
I didn't think about that. That's actually an
just-
interesting point.
Who knows?
Who knows what he was writing in those letters? But
Yeah, so what did you, anyway, let's not do that. Oh my God.
I mean, he was writing something to him, right?
I mean, they're pen pals.
They had to be somehow
He had a
corresponding.
stack of letters. It wasn't like he just said, hey,
Yeah.
I hear you in the slammer.
Well, not just
Got
that
any tips?
Not just that, exactly. Not just that he had letters, but I mean, they had to identify on some level. So, who knows what they were talking about?
I'm glad you enjoyed the painting. Your friend, John Wayne Gacy.
Oh my goodness, that's so bad.
That is horrible.
Yeah,
And he got a job after that, still working with kids.
I know. I mean, he only was sentenced for 16
months.
And then also during the trial, right? Just the whole situation. He had so much support. I have seen the later episodes of the documentary where they mentioned some of the celebrities didn't quite realize what they were supporting, which kind of maybe after the fact, but still, I mean, can you imagine being the victim and going in and then all these high profile Hollywood individuals, actors, celebrities, people you look up to are defending him?
Yeah.
I mean, what are you supposed to do in that situation?
I think he did it perfectly. He got up
Yeah.
and told them the truth. But it resonated with them today.
So, and even him describing it, you could tell, his body language. He shut down, right? He was very closed off.
Right. Sort of went on a spiral is how he described it. Substance abuse, anything to escape. We definitely see that, in our emergency room, people who experience severe trauma go to some really dark places.
Yeah.
They can.
Yeah.
Thank goodness he got help, though.
Well, that's interesting. When he first was confronted by his girlfriend's mom and he went to therapy, he didn't disclose it right away.
No. Right. Sometimes you have to be ready. I'm just saying eventually, though, he talked about that experience he spent in rehab where it was therapy from 8 in the morning until 10 at night.
Yeah.
Every hour on the hour pretty much. And how much groups really helped him feeling like he's not alone.
Yeah.
Just sitting around listening to other people's story and realizing I'm not the only one who went through this.
Yeah.
It can sometimes bring you comfort that you didn't know you needed.
And they kind of alluded to it later on. I mean, he had some of the tendencies of individuals that have suffered child abuse. I mean, brought up the substance abuse he had. I think he had a couple DUIs, right? Because you really do try and detach and kind of numb your emotions.
Yeah, anything to shut off all of that noise in your head.
Yeah. Individuals that have had child abuse, they tend to be more emotionally blunted. They're not as in tune with their feelings at times. There's underlying anger. And they sort of bring that up. I think he's had his own sort of allegations, right? As an adult, where I think the only thing he was it was child endangerment, right? So sending inappropriate text messages to an underage individual, which interestingly was around the same age as him during his trauma. So, I mean, it is a cycle. And, it's something I've never really thought of, but sort of thinking about it while, going through everything. It's sort of if you did experience sexual abuse or some form of powerlessness when you're a child, I mean, that feeling of unfairness, right? Why did this happen to me? I feel would subconsciously perpetuate to where you would become the aggressor as an adult, right? It's sort of
That's interesting.
right? It's almost just an uneasy unfairness. This can't just be only me.
I don't know. I mean, I definitely feel it just splinters you into so many different ways that things can go bad. It can go bad in the way that you see authority figures. It can go bad in the way you see employment, the feelings that you had when you were employed. It can go bad in the way that you see yourself, your sexuality. You start to question, what signals did I give off to make them think that they could do this to me? What are even those signals? What is that? Especially when you're a kid, you don't know that this isn't normal, and you have these possibly these pleasurable sensations mixed with the scary fear, confusion sensations. So it just all gets jumbled in there. And that's a mess in relationships because you don't know kind of how to feel. I'm kind of attracted to this person, but are they going to hurt me? But what if, so maybe there's some kind of feeling like you've got to take the power. You've got to be the aggressor, get them before they get you. I mean, who knows? That's part of what therapy is, for them to work out like where those signals got crossed during that time.
Yeah, and that's important, right? So make sure you don't perpetuate that cycle.
Yeah.
Because the powerless do develop power as they get older, and then like almost those dynamics like reenact, and so it's like identifying that and preventing it.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. Do you think that the documentary for you reflected any way with kind of our work, like? Because we kind of see individuals in a moment in time, and so you see little sort of pockets of kids that have experienced abuse and that sort of thing. But it was interesting kind of seeing someone that's famous, like Drake Bell's he's in his like mid to late 30s, like he's an adult, kind of seeing how it's affected his entire life, right? Like it was kind of interesting seeing that longitudinal approach with what happened to him.
I think it was great because a lot of times we see these people, we put them on pedestals. We don't know what their life is like. We just see them in the movies, or it's interesting the how they talk about it takes a second for them to fall or to stumble.
Yeah.
And the paparazzi is right there to take them down. So there's no place to breathe. You're either on top or you're in flames, crashed in flames. And it is a cost that they've had. It cost them their childhood, whatever that would have been as a child, like just growing up. It may have cost them relationships with people that they trusted or thought that they knew. It costs. But then they can look back on their life and see what they also gave. They gave joy to people. They entertained people. They made a few coins, maybe put it in the bank,
Which Brian Hearn, one of the child actors, mentioned that he's like, everyone feels like because we made money, then what we endured was okay, which is interesting. I thought that was great that he brought that up in the documentary, because it's like, does it completely nullify everything that happens, And I mean, the answer is obviously no, but I mean, it's true. It's like there was, I guess, I don't want to say benefit, but that is the benefit, right? Is fame and money and etc.
And they put themselves in this position that people do judge them. Like, who are you to say what this person is, worth, what their value was? That's the reason they should endure it because they got paid. Who are you to sit in judgment of anybody? Who are we? Like, we are just people. We're given opinions, but it's up to the person to decide what they can and can't endure. It's not up to us. But this is how we set up our society, that we're all judging people all the time about it.
I think that's a great point with judgment is, really child stardom in general, or individual minors, they're put into a position to be judged by the public, which wasn't really their decision. No. So it's like almost
they're just doing a job. They're doing a job. They're acting. They're playing this character. That's their job. Let them go home.
Yeah, like with the trauma that's associated with child stardom, maybe there shouldn't be child stars because they can't make those decisions. Really, if the adults around them are kind of, what am I trying to say here? Like
help them navigate through it all. Yeah.
I mean, look at Amanda Bynes. I mean, she looked so, at the start of that documentary, so intelligent, so bright, and you see how she's so affected now. I mean, you see her kind of, I follow her on TikTok and things, and you just see like her affect is very one note, like she's very closed off. Obviously, we don't know exactly what her underlying conditions are, but like, could it just mainly be trauma? Like, did the trauma bring out something else? Like, it's just sad to see.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like the star just lit up the sky and now it's dim.
Which you kind of see happen with a lot of child stars, right? I mean,
when they did that montage of just all of those people, completely recognizable, kids. Yeah. I told you we had a good one for you today. we talked about a lot. This was a heavy show. So don't be quiet on the set, people.
Exactly.
Yell on the set.
Make sure to voice your concerns.
Yes.
That is
Talk
the
about
takeaway.
it on the set.
And even be loud on the set.
Be loud on the set.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
All right, team. Well, I'm glad we got to discuss this, and we'll meet next time.
Go live your life.
That's right. All righty. Bye.
Bye.